Welcome to this interview practice session which is focused on the quantity surveying profession. And today we're going to look at 50 common interview questions you may be asked within a job interview for a QS position. And during the interview we're going to look at each question in detail and explain some of the answers you can give. And if it's a case that you're a graduate quantity surveyor looking to start your career, or an intermediate QS who is looking to secure your next career move, I really hope you find this video useful. So before we go into the main questions and answers, we should note that the first 25 questions are entry-level questions aimed to assist graduate quantity surveyors with starting their career. And the next 25 questions are more advanced questions aiming to assist intermediate quantity surveyors with some experience in securing their next career move. And these questions are pitched at more of an intermediate to senior level. The questions and answers discussed are applicable to both professional quantity surveyors who work within client or consultancy organisations, and they are also applicable to contractors quantity surveyors working directly for a main contractor or subcontracting organisations. So without further ado, let's go straight into the Q&A practice. And the first question we'll take a look at is a very commonly asked interview question asked of graduates and QSs who are starting their career, and that is, can you please explain your understanding of the key roles and responsibilities of quantity surveyors within the construction industry? And to address this question, I would highly recommend splitting the duties down into pre-contract duties and post-contract duties. Starting with the pre-contract duties before a project gets underway and before the contract is signed. As a quantity surveyor, you may be involved in producing cost estimates and cost planning documents, compiling and issuing tender documentation, compiling and issuing contract documentation, attendance at design team meetings, and providing value engineering advice to the client. And typical post-contract duties after the contract has been signed and the job has been started will include the issue of monthly cost reports for professional quantity surveyors to the client, or cost value reconciliation reports for contractors quantity surveyors. It could also include pricing and monitoring of post-contract variations, submission and review of interim valuations, and the negotiation and agreement of any final accounts. The next question we'll take a look at is, can you please explain which IT skills a quantity surveyor needs to have according to your understanding? And to address this question, I would highly recommend referencing the following key IT skills. Firstly, we could regard working knowledge of Microsoft Excel as being of key importance, as Excel can be used to produce key documents such as financial reports, cost estimates, and bills of quantities. Working knowledge of measurement and takeoff software such as Costex or CAD Measure is also of key importance. This allows quantities to be measured by uploading the project drawings electronically, and this can save time and be much more accurate than using a scale ruler and printed copies of project drawings. Other key IT knowledge we can refer to as being of significant importance will include Microsoft Office packages such as Word, Outlook and PowerPoint. Word can be used to produce tender and contract documentation, whilst Outlook is used to issue email correspondence to the project team and organise cost and design team meetings. More recently, and due to the pandemic, we can also say that there has been a greater need for remote working, and other packages such as Microsoft Teams, Zoom or Google Hangouts are of increasing importance in order to communicate with the project team. The next question we'll take a look at is, what do you see as the key challenges being faced by quantity surveyors on a day-to-day basis? And to address this question, we can say that firstly, being able to accurately monitor and record variations is often a key common challenge for quantity surveyors, and this is to ensure maximum cost certainty for the client, especially when variations are in high frequency. We can also say that we're aware of the need to be well organised when working to key deadlines. For example, when processing interim valuations, there is a 5-day deadline to produce the payment certificate from the valuation due date, and this is a legal requirement under the Housing Grants, Construction and Regeneration Act or Construction Act. Finally, we could also say that it's very important to have a high attention to detail when measuring quantities and the scope of works from project drawings. If any aspect of the works is missed or undermeasured, this typically may result in a variation being claimed from the client or a loss of profit to the main contractor. Another commonly asked interview question you may receive is, what are your short and longer term career goals within the quantity surveying profession? And to address this, we can say that firstly, our short term goals over a 2 to 3 year period are to make a good first impression on the wider team and build positive internal and external relationships. We can also say that we would quickly look to learn company processes and be considered a real asset to the company. Another short-term objective I would highly recommend referencing when first getting started with quantity surveying is to get to the level where you are entrusted to manage your own projects and reach an intermediate QS or project QS level. When looking to address the more medium and longer term objectives over 3 to 5 years, some of the objectives we could reference would include firstly, or to pass the APC and achieve MRICS status, which is commonly regarded as a gold standard to clients, colleagues and quantity surveyors working in the construction industry. We could also say that we would look to encourage and upskill more junior staff members to quickly bring them up to speed with company processes. And finally, we can say that we would look to build long-standing client relationships and win new work for the company. The next question we'll take a look at, again testing our understanding of the duties of quantity surveyors, is can you describe what you see as a typical site-based day for a quantity surveyor? And to address this, firstly we can make reference to inspection and valuation of the contract works, monitoring and assessment of variation claims, attendance of design team meetings and procurement meetings, compiling and issuance of project cost reports and cost value reconciliation reports, review and processing of interim valuations, compiling and issuing of contract and subcontract documentation, and we could also make reference to negotiation and settlement of any final accounts. Another commonly asked interview question that a lot of entry-level QSs receive is, why do you want to work as a quantity surveyor and what parts of the role do you think you would enjoy? And when addressing this is going to be very specific to your own aims and objectives and what parts of the role you may find interesting. But to support with addressing this kind of question, we could firstly make reference to being responsible for the financial performance of projects, including being able to have an impact on the profit and loss of the projects, both as a main contract surveyor or as a client surveyor. We could also say that we would enjoy building long-standing client relationships and providing high standards of service. We could say that we would look to try and ensure that we are the client's first port of call on all cost-related matters to create repeat business. And we could also say that due to having strong interpersonal skills and enjoyment as working as part of a team, we would really enjoy operating as part of a multidisciplinary project team and learning about the QS discipline from more experienced colleagues. The next question we'll take a look at is, please tell us about your attributes and skills that would make you well suited for a quantity surveying role. And to address this, we can say that we possess a strong attention to detail, that we are a quick learner and will be able to pick up on the company's processes in order to hit the ground running, that we possess strong numerical skills whilst also being a determined and calm negotiator, that we would perform well as part of a multidisciplinary project team, we have strong client-facing skills, good communication, good commercial and contractual awareness, and are highly motivated, enthusiastic and eager to learn. The next question we'll take a look at is more of a technical question, testing our in-depth knowledge of the QS profession, and that is, can you please explain some of the different procurement routes you're aware of? And to address this, we could first of all make reference to a traditional procurement route, where the client's architect retains overall risk of the client's design. Design and build procurement, where the responsibility for both design and construction is transferred over to the main contractor. We could also make reference to management contracting and construction management. And finally, we could also refer to private finance initiative. Another question that we may receive on a recent hot topic that's really affected the construction industry recently is, what kind of challenges do you think that COVID has presented to the construction industry? And to address this, we can say that firstly, production shutdowns during COVID have created material shortages and subsequent price increases now that the market has rebounded. In particular, items that are in short supply and that are currently experiencing price increases include steelwork, cladding and plastic components such as piping and drainage. We could then go on to say that this shortness of supply has created significant price increases, placing added pressure on margins and reducing the affordability and viability of developments. The next question we'll focus on is, are you aware of any industry legislation that affects the construction industry and quantity surveyors in particular? And to address this, we can first of all reference a key piece of legislation being the Housing Grants, Construction and Regeneration Act, which has a large effect on the processing and issuing of payment certificates for quantity surveyors in particular. We could also make reference to CDM 2015, where quantity surveyors can now be classed as a designer under the regulations. We can make reference to the building regulations, the Health and Safety at Work Act, GDPR, and also the Climate Change Act. The next question we'll take a look at is, what approach would you have if you were asked to resolve a problematic final account? And to address this question, we could first of all start by saying that we would prepare and collate supporting documentation and review potential for claims internally with the client and project team. We would then agree the items internally that we were happy to concede on, or the items that we would need to hold our position on. We could then look to arrange a meeting with the contractor or client's QS, with the client present if needed, and we would look to review each claim in a calm environment where every stakeholder is given the opportunity to have their say. We would look to present our case within the meeting, with items being backed up by project instructions and supporting substantiation. And finally, we could say that where items were agreed verbally, we would look to try and formalise these in writing as soon as possible, so that each party is aware of the outcomes discussed and agreed. The next question we'll take a look at is please explain your approach if you were due to receive an interim valuation to review, but this was not returned by the main contractor. And to address this, we would need to say that regardless of receiving the interim valuation or not, we would still be sure to value the works and produce a payment certificate or application for payment. This is done in order to comply with my obligations under the contract and also to comply with industry legislation such as the Housing Grants, Construction and Regeneration Act. The next question we'll take a look at is please explain your understanding of the term provisional sum. And to address this question, we can say that firstly, a provisional sum is a sum of money included within the contract that is to be expended for an item of work where the full design details are not yet known at the time of agreeing the contract sum. This may be included as either a defined or undefined provisional sum, depending on the level of detail known at the time of agreeing the contract sum. A common item we could refer to demonstrate our working knowledge of provisional sums would be for items such as Section 278 works to existing highways, where the statutory authority's design requirements are not fully designed or known when appointing the main contractor. Another question we may be asked is to please explain our understanding of the term retention. And to support with addressing this question, we would need to advise that retention is a sum of money held back when making an interim payment. This can be retained by the client or main contractor, usually at around 3% or 5%, depending on the contractual terms that have been agreed. We could then go on to say that retention is held until defects within the works have been made good, and this serves as an incentive for the contractor to return to site and rectify all defects within the works. 50% of retention is often released at practical completion of the works, and the remaining 50% is released when all defects have been made good at the end of the defects liability period. Another question we may receive, testing our contractual knowledge, is what is the significance of practical completion being granted? And to address this, we could firstly say that on PC being granted, 50% of retention is released, the works are handed over by the main contractor to the client, the defects liability period commences, and any insurances of the building will need to be maintained by the client. Finally, we can also say that LADs for subsequent periods of delay following PC can no longer be applied against the main contractor. The next question we'll take a look at is what would happen if practical completion was not achieved on time. And to address this, we can say that firstly, a non-completion certificate would need to be issued. If a non-completion certificate is not issued, then we refer to a term within the industry which is known as time is at large. Where time is at large, then no LADs can be applied against the main contractor for the period of delay. And we have to say here that it's very advisable to issue a non-completion certificate as soon as possible. Otherwise, if time is at large, the contractor has no active revised completion date and only has to complete the works within a reasonable time frame. The next question we'll take a look at is what is the key difference between a cost estimate and cost plan? And to address this, we can say that a cost estimate is compiled based on early stage design information and is often reliant on historic cost information. The level of accuracy of a cost estimate is often lower than a cost plan, as it is essentially a pre-contract prediction on the outturn cost of the works. For example, a cost per square metre estimate is based on the high level area of the building multiplied by a suitable cost per square metre rate, whereas a cost plan is often more detailed and breaks the cost of each component of the building into elemental parts. Plans are developed as and when more design information becomes available and will break the cost down into components such as substructure, superstructure and professional fees. Another common question we may receive is which forms of contract are you aware of and how do they differ? And to address this, we could first of all make reference to a JCT minor works form of contract, a JCT intermediate form, and JCT design and build form. We could also make reference to NEC option A, NEC target cost, FIDIC and ICE. Another common question we may receive is how do you keep up to date with current affairs and matters that affect the quantity surveying profession? And to support with addressing this, we could first of all make reference to reading Building Magazine, reading Estates Gazette, keeping up to date with the BCIS tender price indices updates, reference of RICS guidance notes, and taking into account any feedback received from clients in the supply chain. The next question we'll take a look at is a scenario-based question asking us to explain our approach if we were in a scenario where we had overvalued the works within an interim valuation. And to address this, we could first of all say that we would look to recheck the valuation to make sure that the works were indeed overvalued. If the works were identified as being overvalued, we could review this position with the contractor and client and try to work out a sensible adjustment. If timings allow and we have detected the error within the valuation, a pay less notice may be issued. We could also say that we would look to try and negotiate a revised valuation with the main contractor or client, and if the works were overvalued and it wasn't possible to adjust, as a final resort, we could also say that if the works were indeed overvalued and it was not possible to undertake the above, then the valuation could be adjusted within the subsequent valuation next month. The next question we'll take a look at is how do you conduct yourself with a new client? And to address this, we could say that we were always sure to be friendly, engaging and enthusiastic. We could say that we would look to be inquisitive and try to get an understanding of the key challenges the client may be facing. As an absolute minimum, we would ensure that at all times we are well presented, polite, conscientious and respectful. We may also receive a question asking our understanding of why client care is so important. And to address this, we can first of all say that surveying practices that provide excellent client care are likely to retain existing clients and develop new business leads by receiving positive testimonials. A failure to provide good client care is likely to lead to client dissatisfaction, complaints, and in the worst case scenario, professional indemnity insurance claims. Formal complaints and insurance claims can also be costly and result in a stressful working environment, reduced staff performance, and also be very time consuming. We'll now take a look at some further questions that are aimed at the intermediate to senior QS level. So we'll now take a look at some questions and answers focused at the intermediate to senior QS level. And this section is aimed at quantity surveyors with experience who are looking to secure their next career move. The first question we'll take a look at is how would you advise a client who wanted to know what sources of cost information are available to compile a feasibility estimate? And to address this, first of all we could reference internal benchmarking cost data, previous tender submissions, industry sources of cost information such as the Building Cost Information Service, SPONS, Laxton's, and we could also say that these would commonly be referenced within the assumptions and exclusions section of a feasibility estimate. The next question we'll take a look at is what kind of cost advice did you provide to your client as the design progressed from REBA Work Stage 1 to REBA Work Stage 4? And to address this, we can say that at RIBA Work Stage 1, which is the preparation and brief stage, the level of design detail available was restricted to the schedule of accommodation and high-level design aspirations. At this stage, I was able to prepare a cost per square metre estimate using internal benchmarking data and industry sources of cost information. By using applicable rates and the gross internal floor area, I was able to provide the client with a high-level estimate based on a cost per square metre. As the design progressed into REBA Work Stage 2 through to Stage 4, which is a concept design through to technical design, project drawings and specifications became available, and I was able to use these to compile an elemental cost plan by taking off quantities from the project drawings, and this provided the client with a much more accurate estimate, breaking down the estimate into cost headings from substructure, superstructure, services and professional fees. A follow-on question we may receive in this area is what level of contingency would you recommend or did you recommend to the client? And to address this, we can say that with the input from the project design team, we're usually able to produce a risk register identifying each of the project risks. Each risk is typically assigned a probability and impact profile, and my duty as QS is to advise the team on the cost allocation for each risk item should it be realised. By pricing the risk register in this manner and assigning probability and impact profiles, the contingency for a scheme can be calculated and updated as the scheme progresses. The next question we'll take a look at is how would you advise a client if the cost plan exceeds the project budget? And to address this, we can say that we would analyse the costs to assess the sources of the increase and whether any element of work is abnormally high against the order of cost estimate. By identifying any areas of overspend, we can then propose value engineering opportunities to the client and to the design team to bring the forecast back in line with the project budget. Another question we may receive in relation to cost estimating, what is meant by the term functional unit? And to address this, we can say that a functional unit is a unit of measurement used to represent the prime use of the building or part of a building. For example, when producing a cost estimate for a hotel, the number of bedrooms would form the functional unit. We may also be asked a question on our experience of what we would typically look to exclude from a feasibility cost estimate. And to address this, we can say that normally professional fees, VAT, client decant costs, loose fixtures and fittings, inflation, site acquisition costs, Section 106s, and removal of asbestos. We may also receive a follow-on question to this asking why VAT is typically excluded. And to address this, we can say that this is because different clients will incur different levels of VAT, which may not be applicable. For example, if it was a charitable organisation, then VAT may not be payable. As a client's QS, we may not be in a position to know the correct levels of VAT being calculated unless informed of it. Another question we may receive is checking our understanding of the different types of piling foundations available. And to address this, we can reference sheet piles, secant piles, board piles, and precast piles. We may receive a follow-on question to this, checking our understanding of how CFA board piles work. And to address this, we can say that CFA piles are constructed by rotating a hollow stem continuous flight auger into the soil. This bores out subsoils to a designed depth, and concrete or grout is pumped through the hollow stem, maintaining static head pressure. This then fills the cylindrical cavity as the auger is slowly removed. We may also receive an additional question asking what advice we would give to a client wanting to know the technical disadvantages of a steel frame construction. And to address this, we could say that we would make the client aware of the disadvantages, such as that steel frames require fire protection, certain parts of the structure over time may need replacing, the price of steel is often variable and fluctuates, which can create funding risks and cost risk to the scheme. There is a requirement for experienced and skilled labour, which may be hard to source, and we can say that because of the specialist nature of the works, labour resource may be harder to procure. The next question we'll take a look at is what different forms of fire protection are you aware of that can be used on steel frames? And to address this, we could say that we're aware of intumescent paint, fire protective boarding, and spray applied fire resistive material. Another question we may receive in relation to interim valuations is, can you tell me what elements you would include within an interim valuation? And to address this, we could make reference firstly to the site preliminaries, the measured works, any variation items, materials on and off site, any loss and expense claims, and any retention that's applicable. A question we may receive on our contractual knowledge could be, how would you advise your clients on using standard versus bespoke forms of contract? And to address this, we could say that this would depend on the client's objectives, we would make them aware of the implications of both options and advise them accordingly. We would need to make them aware that standard forms are written by legal experts and that rights and obligations of each party are clearly set out in the required level of detail. Risks should be allocated appropriately between the parties, and parties should be familiar with the provisions in the form, meaning this results in greater consistency in application and fewer unforeseen anomalies. We could also say that the time and expense of preparing a fresh document or bespoke document for each project is avoided. Finally, we can also say that case law is built up over time against standard forms, which provides good sources of knowledge and clarity of the terms. Staying with the contract practice area, we may also receive a question asking what items must be in place before liquidated damages can be applied. And to address this, we would firstly need to say that a non-completion certificate would need to be in place, as well as a pay less notice, and under a JCT contract, a Notice 1 and Notice 2 would need to be issued. The next question we'll take a look at is how would you go about valuing materials off-site? And to address this, we can say that when valuing materials off-site during a project, we would look to obtain proof of ownership that the items being paid for will transfer to the employer upon payment. This is also known as a vesting certificate. We would need to ensure that insurance of the materials was in place and that materials are clearly labelled as being the property of the site and of the client and set apart from any other materials. We would also need to say that a materials offsite bond would need to be acquired if this was needed under the terms of the contract. Another question we may receive is what items would you normally include within a cost report or financial statement? And to address this, we can say that a financial statement would typically include reference to the contract sum, any instructed variations, potential future variations as advance warnings, any ongoing claims, the anticipated final account total, the total of certified payments, and any provisional sum adjustments. We may also receive another question checking our understanding of the purpose of a financial report. And to address this, we can say that this is to report against budgeted values and to act as a working cost check on the project budget, to give the client an understanding of any savings or additional monies required. It's also to report on contract progress against pre-contract predictions. The next question we'll take a look at is how would you advise a client on reviewing an adverse weather claim? To address this, we can say that on receipt of the claim, this would need to be we would check that this is supported by historical weather data taking into account the time of year and region the project is located in. The contractor's claim should be based on data from a recognised independent source, such as a Met Office, and the rainfall and temperatures referenced would be compared against previous years to determine if these would adversely impact the progress of the main contractor. The prolongation period should be equivalent to the extension of time being sought. We may also receive a question checking our working understanding of the terms defined and undefined provisional sums. And to address this, we can say that defined provisional sums are those that are sufficiently well defined or detailed to allow the contractor to make allowances for them in their programming, planning and pricing preliminaries. And for defined provisional sums, there will be sufficient design information to describe how the works in question are to be fixed to the building, in which location and in what quantity. We may also receive a question on our understanding of how to measure cut and fill. And to address this, we can say that we would typically look to measure cut and fill by obtaining the project drawings and using the existing levels and proposed levels. We would look to divide the area of excavation into a grid and populate the levels on the grid to establish an average, existing and proposed level, and this would then determine which areas required excavation and which areas required imported material. We may also receive a question on our understanding of the term prime cost sum, and to address this we can say that a prime cost sum is the cost of an item that has not either been selected or known at the time of the contract's sum being agreed. If the price of the item chosen is different than the prime cost sum included within the contract, then the client will typically pay the main contractor the difference plus an agreed profit margin as stated in the contract. Typical examples of when prime cost sums are used are on bricks and roof tiles, where a prime cost sum per 1,000 units is included within the contract. The next question we'll take a look at is how would you go about advising your client on dealing with an error that was contained within the bill of quantities. And to address this, we could say that on identification of the error, we would look to advise a client that if the error was identified prior to the contract being signed, then this could be discussed with the contractor and amended in accordance with the option notified in the instruction to tenderers. However, once the contract had been signed, both parties must stand by the rate within the contract, even if this were included incorrectly. Only through agreement would the parties be able to amend the contract rate. The next question we'll take a look at is how would you go about advising your client when selecting a procurement route. And to address this, we could say that when advising the client, we were always sure to give due consideration to their objectives around cost, time, design control, quality assurance and risk transfer. For example, under a design and build procurement route, this would offer good risk transfer of the design performance, but we need to be aware that there are trade-offs against paying risk premiums and a loss of design control when compared to a traditional procurement method. We may also receive a follow-on question checking our understanding of how the traditional procurement route works, and to address this we could say that the design is completed by the client's design team before competitive tenders are invited and a main contractor appointed to build what the designers have specified. The contractor takes responsibility and financial risk for the construction of the works to the design produced by the client's design team for the contract sum within the contract period. However, the client takes the responsibility and risk for the design and the design team performance. However, the client takes the responsibility for the risk of the design and design team performance. That brings us towards the end of this interview practice. Please be sure to subscribe to this channel to receive ongoing career and APC support.